Drift Station Alpha did not look like much. That was, if anyone had ever bothered to ask, entirely the point. It sat at the outer edge of the Sol frontier, a dark, slow-spinning station with old plating on its exterior hull that had gone the color of dried blood from years of radiation exposure. Its energy signature was low. Its communications output was minimal. The Galactic Unity Council had sent an assessment team through 11 years ago. The team had spent 4 hours aboard, taken some readings, photographed the docking bays, and filed a report that described the station as a ceremonial peacekeeping installation with minimal threat projection capacity. 14 ships, older classes, low combat readiness. The assessment team had looked at the outside of things. They had not stayed for dinner. Rear Admiral Cole Avery received Nina Dare's signal at 0340 station time. He was in his quarters, asleep, when the alert pulled him up. He read the signal, sitting on the edge of his bunk, in the half-dark, still in the clothes he had fallen asleep in 2 hours earlier. He read it once, slowly. Then he looked at the 17 seconds of footage attached to it. 312 Kethari vessels in the orbital band above a colony of 4,000 people. The footage was grainy from the interference the Kethari ships had been laying down, but the shapes were clear enough. He set the tablet on his knee. He sat there for a moment in the quiet. Then he stood up, put on his boots, and walked to the tactical room. By the time his executive officer Leon Price found him there, 40 minutes later, Cole had 6 junior officers around him, and a wall of calculations spread across 3 screens. Leon stood in the doorway, looked at the screens, looked at Cole, and did not say good morning, because it clearly was not. Leon said, "How bad?" Cole said, 312 ships above a colony of 4,000 civilians. Leon looked at the screens again. "We have 14 ships here." Cole said, "We have 14 ships here." Leon had served with Cole Avery for 9 years. He knew the difference between a man doing math and a man who had already finished the math. He waited. Cole said, "Get me a secure channel. The coded relay. Routing points 2, 7, and 11. Leon said, "The deep routing?" Cole said, "All 4 of them." The Galactic Unity Council monitored standard communications across the frontier as a matter of course. What they did not monitor, because the 2841 assessment report had concluded there was nothing worth monitoring, were the narrow, deep-coded relay channels that Drift Station Alpha and 17 other human naval installations had been maintaining in quiet, patient silence for 11 years. Not broadcasting, not advertising, just holding the connection open, the way you hold a door open for someone you are not sure is coming, but you leave the door open anyway, because that is the kind of person you are. Cole's signal went through 4 relay points in under 3 minutes. It reached 17 other stations, 4 deep-range carrier groups running dark in the outer belt, 2 Marine expeditionary fleets that had been on long rotation exercises in the cold space beyond the frontier markers. The signal said, "Colony under attack. Coordinates attached. Full fleet composition of hostile force. Activation of Frontier Response Protocol." The response came back within 4 hours. Not 6 ships, not 14, 260 vessels confirmed and folding toward Drift Station Alpha's muster point, running cold. No lights, no active communications, no energy signatures a long-range scanner would flag as a threat until they were already where they were going. Leon stood at the muster board and watched the confirmation lights come in one by one and did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "When did we have 260 ships?" Cole said, "We've always had 260 ships." On Nexus Station, in the Galactic Unity Council's main chamber, Paige Corwin received a routine courtesy notification that the Human Interstellar Naval Service had activated its Frontier Response Protocol. She was humanity's attaché to the Council, a title that, for 16 years, had meant sitting in a very large room and being politely ignored. She was good at it. She had learned to be good at it, the way you learn to be good at things that take patience instead of speed. The Council's security liaison came to find her within the hour. He was a tall species, the Cathari's closest diplomatic ally on the Council, and he carried himself with the ease of someone who had not been surprised by anything in a long time. He told Paige that the human response appeared to be a proportional civilian protection gesture, and asked if she could confirm the size of the response fleet. Paige said, "It won't be 6 ships." The liaison tilted his head. "How many, then?" Paige looked at him with the steady, comfortable expression of a person who has been waiting a very long time for a specific moment, and has now arrived at it. She said, "Enough." She did not elaborate. The liaison went back to his seat in the council chamber and filed a note to the Cathari diplomatic office that read, "Humans activating frontier response. Recommend notifying Vethuun's fleet command as precaution. Anticipated response size, minimal." It was, in the long record of the Galactic Unity Council's correspondence, one of the more consequential memos ever marked as low priority. At Drift Station Alpha, the last of the response fleet folded in at 0611. 261 vessels, counting the 14 already docked at the station. They ran in tight formation, cold and dark, no comms traffic, no signal leakage. Just mass and motion, moving through the dark, toward Vesta's edge, with the quiet, unhurried certainty of something that had made up its mind a long time ago, and was only now arriving at the doing of it. Cole Avery stood on the bridge of the INS Relentless, and looked at the fleet spread across his screens. 412 years of human space history, pressed into 261 hulls. Ships that the Council's reports called aging. Ships that those same reports said had minimal threat projection. Ships crewed by people who had grown up on a planet where the food chain was not theoretical, and the weather could kill you, and the distance between one human settlement and the next had once been the most dangerous space in the known world. Leon Price stood beside him and said, "We are 6 hours from Vesta's edge." Cole said, "I know." Leon said, "The Cathari fleet will not be expecting us." Cole said, "I know that too." Leon looked at the screens. All those ships, all that dark, the colony somewhere ahead of them with 4,000 people in the rock, waiting on something they had no reason to believe was coming. Leon said quietly, "We always come." Cole said nothing. He did not need to. The fleet was already moving, and the dark ahead of them was just distance, and distance had never once stopped a human navy that had already decided where it was going. 6 hours. Vesta's edge did not know it yet. But the answer to Nina Dare's signal was already on its way. High Marshal Vethuun had been in fleet command for 30 years. In those 30 years, he had conducted 19 expansion campaigns across 4 sectors. He had faced 11 different species in open space combat. He had never lost a campaign. Not because he was reckless. He was, if anything, the opposite. Precise. Measured. The kind of commander who won not by being the strongest in the room, but by calculating exactly how much strength was needed, and applying it cleanly, without waste. He reviewed the incoming human fleet data at 0608 local with mild professional interest. 261 vessels, mixed classes. The mass tonnage was lower than his own fleet across almost every comparison. The ship designs were unfamiliar, dense, layered hulls with unusual plating geometry. But the numbers were what mattered, and the numbers were not frightening. His fleet outnumbered theirs by a significant margin. His ships were newer, better resourced, and operating from an already secured orbital position. He noted in his tactical log, "Human contingent engaged at 0612. Anticipate resolution within 4 hours." It was the most expensive note he ever wrote. Cole Avery's first order was not a weapons order. It was a communications order. He opened a broadband channel across every active frequency above Vesta's edge, broadcast wide enough that every Cathari ship in the orbital band would receive it clearly. And he spoke in serviceable Cathari, not perfect, but clear enough to carry exactly the weight he intended. He said, "This is Rear Admiral Cole Avery, Interstellar Naval Service, Sol Command. You are in unauthorized occupation of a human colonial settlement. You have 1 hour to begin full withdrawal of your fleet and ground forces. I will not repeat this offer." Vethun listened to the message twice. Then he replied through his own comms officer that the human admiral was welcome to observe the completion of a lawful territorial acquisition by a full member species of the Galactic Unity Council, and that any interference would be noted in the formal record as an act of aggression by a non-member observer species. It was a textbook response, clean, legally accurate by Council standards. Cole Avery listened to it, nodded once, and said to Leon, "Start the clock." The hour passed. The Cathari did not withdraw. What happened in the 6 hours that followed did not match any model in Vethun's tactical database. The human fleet did not engage the way he expected. They did not form a standard attack line. They did not attempt to punch through his orbital screen at a single point. They moved across the engagement space in groups. Small, fast clusters that hit from multiple directions simultaneously, absorbed damage that should have been fatal, and kept coming. Vethun's first salvo destroyed 3 human ships cleanly. Then 4 more. Good numbers. Strong opening. The breaking point model said the human force should begin showing signs of retreat between 15 and 20% losses. At 15% losses, the human fleet accelerated. Vethun recalibrated. 25% then. At 25% losses, the human ships changed their formation pattern, adapted their approach vectors, and hit 2 of his carrier groups from angles his positioning had not accounted for. He lost 40 ships in the next 40 minutes. It was not the losses themselves that shook him. Losses happened in combat. It was the way the human fleet responded to their own damage that sat wrong in his chest like a stone he could not identify. They did not fight like a force trying to survive. They fought like a force that had decided survival was a secondary concern, and the only question left was how much they were going to take with them. And they talked to each other constantly. His comms analysts pulled fragments of the human tactical communications, ship to ship, fast and loose, not following any standard protocol format he recognized. They were adapting in real time, calling out openings, flagging targets, changing plans mid-movement without waiting for central command approval. It was not chaos. It was something else. Something that moved too fast for his command structure to match. Vethun increased his fleet's fire output by 30% and rearranged his formation. The human fleet hit the new formation from 3 sides within 11 minutes, like it had been waiting for him to commit to a position. He lost 60 more ships. On the surface of Vesta's edge, below the burning colony buildings and the smoke that had been climbing into the sky for 6 hours, a set of drop pods came down through the atmosphere. They were not elegant. Some of them tumbled. The Cathari ground survey teams had left surface-to-air systems active around the colony perimeter, and 4 of the pods were hit on the way down. Lance Corporal Danny Holt felt his pod shudder when the one to his left took the hit and came apart. There was a specific mental practice he had developed over 3 deployments, a small, hard box he kept inside his head, and when something happened that he could not do anything about, he put it in the box, closed the lid, and kept moving. He was good at it by now, better than he wanted to be. His pod hit the ground 200 meters east of the Cathari ground command installation. 12 pods came down. 8 of them made it. Danny hit the ground running. There were 23 people in his unit. 8 Marines from the pod group linked up with 15 more for the second drop site 300 meters south. They moved low and fast through the smoke and the ruined surface colony. The Cathari survey teams pulling back toward their installation as the ground engagement started. And Danny kept his eyes on the installation door and his mind on the box and the photo of his sister inside his helmet lining that he had been meaning to replace with something more waterproof for 2 deployments now and had never gotten around to. He went through the door first. The ground engagement lasted 41 minutes. When it was over, Danny stood in the main corridor of the Cathari installation, with a fractured left arm he hadn't noticed getting, and 4 cracked ribs he had noticed but decided to deal with later. And he picked up his comms unit and pressed the channel for the colony Warrens. He said, "Colony Administrator, we've secured the upper level. I've got a lot of very scared people up here saying they belong to you." In the Warren tunnels below, Nina Dare heard his voice come through the speaker on the wall. Cal heard it too. The 4,000 people in the dark heard it move through them like a current. Nina looked at Cal. Cal was crying. He was trying not to, but he was, in the way people cry when they have been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and someone finally takes it from them. Nina picked up the comms unit. She said, "Tell them to come down. I'll make coffee." Above them in orbit, the Cathari 7th Expansion Fleet, 800 ships, 60 years of unopposed expansion, the pride of a species that had never lost a campaign, was in full tactical retreat. Vest-Un had made the call at 11:47, 2 hours earlier than his worst-case models had projected, because the models had been built on the assumption that at some point the human fleet would stop pressing forward. It had not stopped. He wrote in his tactical log, in the space where the 4-hour resolution estimate sat, "Error of category. Revise all prior assessments of human combat doctrine." He did not yet know what to replace the assessment with. He would think about that for a very long time. For now, he had a fleet to pull back, and a government to report to, and the particular cold feeling of a man who has spent 30 years being the most dangerous thing in a room, and has just learned, in the hardest possible way, that he had been miscounting the rooms. The casualty report came in at 1400. Leon Price read it to Cole Avery in the tactical room of the INS Relentless, while the ship still sat in orbit above Vesta's edge. The Cathari fleet was gone, fully withdrawn, fold signatures tracked, heading back toward Cathari space. The engagement was over in every measurable sense. The numbers, though, were what numbers always were after something like this. A list of things that could not be undone. 31 human vessels destroyed. 412 dead. Just under 2,000 wounded across the fleet. Cole stood with his hands flat on the table and listened to all of it. He did not move. When Leon finished reading, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Get me a full repair priority list by 1700. I want the wounded vessels triaged before anything else." Leon said, "Understood." Cole said, "And pull the Marine drop unit reports, all of them." The Marine reports came through over the next hour. 8 pods had reached the surface. 8 out of 12. Danny Holt's unit had secured the Cathari ground installation in 41 minutes and held the upper colony until additional ground support arrived. It was clean work by any standard. It was also the kind of clean that had a cost written underneath it in a smaller font. On Vesta's edge, the smoke was still clearing from the eastern side of the colony, where the residential blocks had been. The water processing facility on that side was gone entirely. The landing pad had taken a direct hit in the second bombardment pass, and was a flat field of fused metal and gravel now. 2 of the surface buildings were still standing. The rest were rubble, cooling slowly in the afternoon air. Nina Dare walked the upper colony with Cole Avery 2 hours after the ground installation was secured. Cole had been in enough post-engagement zones to know what they looked like and felt like and smelled like. This one was quieter than most. The colonists were coming up from the Warrens in small groups, blinking in the daylight like people emerging from something they hadn't been sure they'd get out of. They moved through the ruins of their homes with the stunned, careful step of people taking inventory of a loss they weren't ready yet to name. Nina walked beside Cole without talking for a while. She showed him the signal room, or what was left of it. The roof had partially collapsed in the third bombardment pass. The chair she had sat in to send the signal was still there, buried under a section of ceiling panel. The screens were dark. The backup relay unit, miraculously, still had a green light on its face. Nina stood and looked at it for a moment. She said, "I didn't think you'd come." Cole said, "We always come." It was not said as a boast. It had none of the sharp edge a boast would carry. It had the texture of something that had been said enough times to wear smooth, the way a stone wears smooth in a river. Not because it is hard, but because it has been through enough to lose the roughness. Nina looked at him for a moment, and then looked back at the green light on the relay unit. She said, "They'll come back. The Cathari." Cole said, "I know." She said, "Not with 300 ships next time." Cole said, "I know that too." Neither of them said what came after that. There was a shape to the silence between those words that did the work better than more words would have. Nina had run this colony for 7 years. She had buried people here before today, from accidents and illness and the ordinary hard costs of living at the edge of settled space. She would bury more today. That was the reality that sat underneath everything else like bedrock, not movable, just present. She started walking again, and Cole walked beside her. In the colony's makeshift medical station, which was the largest remaining intact surface building, a storage facility repurposed in the first hour after the ground engagement, cots on the floor and medkits open everywhere. Danny Holt sat with his back against the wall, and his left arm in a temporary brace. The medic had told him the fracture was clean and would heal well. She had also told him the ribs were going to hurt for 6 weeks, which he had already known from previous experience, and he had thanked her, and she had moved on to someone who needed her more. He had the photo of his sister in his hand. He had taken it out of his helmet lining without thinking about it, somewhere in the medical station's first hour, and now he held it and looked at the faces of the people around him. Colonists and Marines mixed together, the noise of pain and relief, and the strange half-quiet of a place where a lot of people are all feeling enormous things at the same time. He thought about the 4 pods that hadn't made it down. He thought about the 8 that had. He thought about what those numbers meant and what they didn't mean, and how neither number was the whole truth of it. He put the photo back in his helmet lining, not because he was done thinking about it, because he was not the kind of person who put things in a box and forgot them. He was the kind of person who put them somewhere safe, so he could come back to them when he was home, and there was time, and his sister could sit across the table from him, and he could tell her, in the careful, incomplete way he always told her, about the parts he was allowed to say out loud. That evening, at the edge of the colony's open ground, the burial took place. 66 people. 47 colonists from the bombardment. 9 more from injuries in the warrens. 5 Marines from the drop units. 5 crew members from destroyed vessels, whose bodies had been recovered. There were no speeches. Cole had asked Nina if she wanted one, and she had said no, not in those words. She had just been quiet, in a specific way that answered the question well enough. The colonists gathered in the cold air as the sun dropped toward the ridge. The Marines stood with them. The fleet crew who could be spared from repair duties stood with them. Cole stood beside Nina. Nina stood with her people. 66 markers in the ground of Vesta's edge. Ground the Cathari had come to take. Ground that 4,000 people had gone underground to hold in the dark while they waited on a signal that had no guaranteed answer. The wind came off the ridge and moved through the crowd, and nobody said anything, and that was, in its own way, the most honest thing that had been said all day. Above them, 230 human ships held orbit, not going anywhere yet, not until the colony's systems were stable and the wounded were treated and the dead were in the ground. It was the kind of thing you did not put in a tactical report. The kind of thing that did not appear in the fleet's official after-action records. It was just a fact, the way gravity is a fact, present and unannounced and holding everything in place. The Cathari government filed its formal grievance with the Galactic Unity Council on the third day after the battle. It was a precise and thorough document, 41 pages. It described the human frontier navy's response as disproportionate escalation against a recognized member species conducting a lawful territorial expansion operation. It cited the 2841 Council Assessment of Human Naval Capacity, the one that called the frontier stations ceremonial, as evidence that the level of force deployed was beyond any reasonable interpretation of civilian protection. It requested formal censure of humanity's observer delegation, a review of the Frontier Response Protocol, and a binding resolution limiting human military activity in the outer sectors. It was, by the standards of galactic diplomatic correspondence, a very strong document. Paige Corwin read all 41 pages in her small office at the back of the council chambers on Nexus Station. She read it with a cup of cold coffee and a pen that she clicked without writing anything. When she was done, she set it on her desk and looked at the wall for a moment. Then she went into the council chamber and sat down and did not say a word for 5 days. The other species talked. They talked at great length. The Cathari delegation made its case clearly and repeated the key points often enough that the chamber began to have a rhythm to it, a groove worn into the floor. The smaller species, the ones who had watched the Cathari expand toward their own territory markers over the past 30 years, and had filed quiet, careful diplomatic concerns that the Council had acknowledged and then left unresolved, asked their questions in the careful, nervous way of people who needed to know the answer, but were not sure they were allowed to ask. Paige sat in her chair at the edge of the observer section and listened to all of it. On the 5th day, she stood up. She pressed the floor button for speaking rights. The chamber's senior arbiter recognized her with the mild, tolerant expression he had worn every time the human delegation spoke for the past 16 years. Paige said, "I'd like to show the chamber something." She played the 17 seconds of footage Nina Dare had attached to her signal. She played it at full scale on the chamber's display wall. 312 Cathari vessels in orbit above a small colony of 4,000 people. The bombardment beginning. The surface buildings coming down. She let it run. She did not narrate it. She let the chamber be quiet for a moment after it ended. Then she said, "A species that grows up on a high-gravity world, alongside predators that could take them apart, does not learn to be weak. It learns to be patient. We have sat in these chambers as observers for 30 years. We have filed reports. We have made requests. We have been patient in ways that most species represented in this room would not recognize as patience, because it looked, from the outside, like silence." She paused. She said, "I would not suggest testing our patience further." She sat down. The chamber was quiet for a long time after that. The kind of quiet that is not empty, but full, packed with the specific discomfort of people reassessing something they thought they had already finished assessing. The censure motion came to a vote 2 days later. It failed. 9 votes against, 2 in favor. The 2 in favor were the Cathari delegation and their closest allied species on the council. The 9 against included species who had, for 30 years, said nothing in particular about humanity, and were now saying in the language of a council vote something very specific indeed. 3 weeks after the Battle of Vesta's Edge, the Galactic Unity Council took up a reclassification proposal that had been sitting in a committee backlog for 11 years. It had been submitted by the human delegation in 2830, requesting an upgrade from observer status to provisional first-tier membership. It had been deferred 11 times. Budget cycle, procedural concerns, pending review. 8-3. Paige Corwin received the confirmation notice on a small screen in the council corridor, and read it standing up, with her coat still on, because she had just come in from outside and had not yet sat down. She read it twice. Then she walked to the window at the end of the corridor that looked out over the enormous domed atrium of Nexus Station. All that light and motion and the flags of 11 species hanging in a row. She stood there for a while, not celebrating, just standing, the way you stand when something you have worked toward for a very long time finally arrives, and you need a moment to let the shape of it become real, before you do anything else. It was not everything. She knew that. Provisional first-tier membership was a beginning, not a destination. There would be more sessions, more documents, more careful grinding work in chambers where the air was old and the arguments were older. But a door that had been closed for 30 years was open now, and Paige Corwin had been the one standing in the corridor when it opened, and she thought that counted for something. At Drift Station Alpha, Cole Avery got the membership notification on the small screen in the station cafeteria while he was eating lunch. A sandwich. He read the notification, set the screen down, and finished the sandwich. Leon Price sat across from him and said, "You going to celebrate?" Cole said, "After we repair the fleet." Leon said, "The fleet is mostly repaired." Cole said, "Then after I finish this sandwich." On Vesta's edge, Nina Dare rebuilt. The Eastern Water Facility came first. It was not the most visible repair, and it was not the one that felt the best emotionally, but it was the most necessary. And Nina had spent 7 years learning to do the most necessary thing first, and feel good about it later. Then the residential blocks, the signal array, which went up on the 3rd week and sent its first clean, uninterrupted test signal out to the frontier buoy and got a clean response back. And Nina stood in the rebuilt signal room and listened to the confirmation tone and did not say anything. Cal, behind her, said, "We should throw a party or something." Nina said, "Put it in the planning log." She planted a narrow-leaf oak sapling in the ground above the burial site. It was a small thing. It would take years to be anything more than a thin stick in the dirt. But she had been taught, by someone she did not talk about, that you did not wait to be done grieving before you started growing. Those two things were not sequential. They happened at the same time, side by side, in the same soil. Danny Holt re-enlisted. His arm healed clean, faster than the medic expected, and the ribs healed on schedule, which was to say, they hurt for 6 weeks and then stopped hurting. And at the end of the 6 weeks, he was in the re-enlistment office, filling out the form that would send him back out to the frontier. The clerk asked him if he was sure. Danny said yes. The clerk stamped the form, and that was that. He sent his sister a letter, handwritten, because he knew she would make fun of him for it, which was the entire reason to do it. He told her almost nothing about Vesta's edge in the letter. He told her he was fine. He told her the food had been bad. He told her he had fixed a problem with the photo in his helmet lining and would explain when he saw her. She would read between everything he didn't say and understand all of it. It was the most useful thing about having a sister who had known him his whole life. In Catheri space, Vethu Woon submitted his official report. The tactical analysis, the loss numbers, the formal recommendation that Catheri's 7th expansion doctrine be completely restructured before any future engagement with human-controlled space was considered. Buried in the appendix, marked as personal observation rather than official record, he wrote, "They sent that signal knowing there was no obligation on anyone to answer it. The humans answered it anyway. I have 30 years of fleet experience, and I do not have a framework for a species that treats obligation as something they carry inside themselves, rather than something given to them by law or treaty. I thought I understood what they were. I was wrong about the category entirely." The Galactic Unity Council's updated assessment of human naval capability, filed by Paige Corwin, ran to 640 pages. Comprehensive, detailed, carefully sourced. The first line read, "We would like to revisit some earlier conclusions." The last line read, "Observer status was always the wrong word for them. It implied they were watching. They were never watching." The paperwork was the worst part of running a colony at the edge of known space. Nina Dare had said that to her deputy, Cal, at least a dozen times. Not the cold, not the dust storms that came off the ridgeline 3 months out of every year and turned the air the color of old rust. Not the supply ships that ran late, or the water recyclers that broke down with the reliability of a bad habit. The paperwork, mineral logs, population census updates, infrastructure requests that went to a regional office that may or may not have been staffed by a living person in the last 4 years. She was on page 6 of a 40-page resource form when the array went off. Every screen in the signal room lit at once. 4,211 people lived in Vesta's Edge. Most of them were underground at this hour, in the residential warrens, or working the third shift in the mineral tunnels below the South Ridge. The colony sat on the surface like a small scar. Pressurized buildings, a landing pad, 2 water towers, a signal array, and a fence that had never once stopped anything that really wanted in. The array showed 312 vessels dropping out of fold space in the orbital band above the colony. Mina looked at the screen for 2 full seconds. Then, she looked at Cal. Cal was 26 from Ohio and had been her deputy for 3 years. He was steady, not the kind of person who panicked in a visible way. But his face, right then, looked like a man who had stepped onto ice he could hear cracking under him. Nina said, "Get everyone underground. Close the secondary warren gates." Cal said, "What are those ships?" "Cathari," she said. "Go." She knew the Cathari the way any colony administrator in Sector 77 knew them. Old species, organized. They had been expanding their territory for 60 years without serious resistance, because the Galactic Unity Council considered their expansion a matter of internal development. The Council had 11 member species. Humans were not one of them. Humans held observer status, the Council's polite word for a species allowed to sit in the room as long as it stayed quiet and did not touch anything. The Cathari did not negotiate with observer status species. The array's trajectory calculations gave Nina 17 minutes before the first bombardment pass. She did not spend them evacuating. She sent Cal to move the colonists. She went to the signal room herself, sat down in the chair that had left a permanent impression in the floor padding from years of use, and she started working. The first signal went to the Galactic Unity Council's open emergency channel. She kept it short. Colony name, coordinates, population count, fleet composition, overhead. A formal request for council intervention. She knew exactly what the council would do with that request. They would log it. They would note the filing date. Somewhere in a chamber she had never seen, a small light on a very large board would turn from gray to yellow, and a bureaucrat who had never once been to Sector 77 would mark it as pending review. She sent it anyway, because it went on record, because someday, when someone wanted to know how it started, the record would show that Vesta's Edge asked. The second signal took more work. The Cathari ships were already laying interference across the main bands. She could feel the array pushing against it, the signal quality dropping in real time, like a tire losing air. She rerouted through the backup relay, compressed the transmission, and sent it narrow and low. Not up toward the council chambers on Nexus Station, but out along the drift, aimed at the Sol Frontier Naval Relay Buoy, sitting at the edge of inhabited space like a forgotten mailbox. She pulled 17 seconds of footage from the atmosphere sensors. The Cathari fleet above Vesta's Edge, hanging in orbit the way a boot hangs above an anthill before it comes down. She attached the footage. Colony coordinates, fleet size, civilian count, sector data. Then she opened the voice channel and said, in the plain flat way she said most things, "This is Nina Dare, Vesta's Edge Colony, Sector 77. We are 4,211 people. Do with that what you will. She closed the channel. The bombardment started 4 minutes later. The first pass took the eastern side of the surface colony. The 2 residential blocks there had been empty for 11 minutes. Cal had done his job, but they came down like they weighed nothing. The signal array took a glancing hit on the second pass, and the building shook around Nina like something enormous had grabbed it by the shoulders and then let go. She shut down the surface systems, pulled the power down into the underground grid, went through the Warren Gate and sealed it behind her. The Warrens were carved into the rock of the South Ridge, mining tunnels from the colony's first 2 years, widened and reinforced over time. Cool and dark and smelling of mineral dust and old recycled air. 4,000 people filled them the way people fill a space they hadn't planned to live in, quietly, holding children close. Not looking at each other in the specific way people avoid each other's eyes when they are scared and don't want to make it more real by sharing it. Nina walked through to the main junction where Cal stood with his tablet and a look that asked a question without using any words. She said, "Signals away." Cal said, "To the council?" Nina said, "And the frontier boy." Cal was quiet. Above them, through 40 feet of solid rock, the bombardment came through as a low rhythmic pressure. Not loud, more like a headache that lived behind your back teeth. Cal said, "Do you think anyone is actually out there? At the buoy?" Nina sat down on a crate of water filtration parts, stacked against the tunnel wall. She picked up the resource form she had somehow carried down here without noticing. She said, "I don't know." It was the honest answer. The Sol Frontier Naval Buoy was old. The stations attached to it were older. The Galactic Unity Council's last assessment had called them ceremonial. The ships docked there, the report said, were minimal threat projection. Relics. The Council's word for things it had stopped worrying about. Nina had read that report once, 3 years ago. She had thought about it the way you think about a sound you hear in the middle of the night and cannot name. Above her, Vesta's edge burned on the surface. And somewhere out in the dark, between here and the edge of inhabited space, a signal traveled. Small, alone, carrying 17 seconds of footage and one woman's voice saying 4,000 names, the only way one person can hold that many names at once. By putting them all inside a single sentence. By trusting that somewhere in the dark, something would hear the weight of it. The rock held. 4,000 people breathed recycled air and waited. Above them, the Kethari began their ground survey of the colony's surface. They did not check the Warrens. They would learn later that this was a mistake. Not a tactical mistake. Something older than tactics. The kind of error you only understand about a creature after it has already come out of the dark at you. And by then, the understanding does not help you very much. But that was later. Right now, it was just Nina Dare, sitting in a tunnel, doing paperwork, and waiting for something she could not name and had not allowed herself to call hope.